Once upon a time, at the edge of a forest, in a clearing beside a witch's wood, there was a house called Hinterkaifeck. It sat alone at the edge of the trees, halfway between here and nowhere, a crooked seam between silence and sin. The family inside worked hard, prayed harder, and buried their secrets deep. But secrets have roots, and some houses grow strange things in their walls. This one grew something that would devour everyone inside.
Lark in a cage high on the hill sings to the silence sweet and still.
The land was quiet here. Each farmhouse stood alone, scattered like islands in a sea of silence. Secrets traveled faster than carriages. No one said a word, at least not while you were listening. Farther out, there was a farm. Too far to hear the church bells, too close to the woods to rest easy. Cold in winter, colder inside. The wind always found a way in. The attic groaned at night, even when no one was up there. Or so they hoped. They called it Hinterkaifeck, and long after the walls fell, the names of those who died there clung to the air like smoke and silence. Let me tell you about them, not just how they died, but how they lived. Bavaria, 1922. The war had ended, but peace had not yet arrived. Neighbors trusted the church more than each other, and behind one locked door, the story waited. Our tale begins not with a scream, but with a wedding, and a house that already stood waiting. In 1886, a young man named Andreas Gruber married a woman 12 years his senior, Cecilia. He was 27, she was 39. She was a widow with 2 children from her first marriage and a farm she'd inherited when her husband passed away. Andreas had worked that land as a farmhand. Some said he married the land and not the woman. Andreas was proud, harsh. He trusted no one, locked everything, watched everything. And in the village, people watched him back. The tyrant. That's what he would become in this story. Cecilia was more reserved, hard to know. She kept her head down, kept to the shadows. The matriarch, silent, still, steadfast. No one asked why she stayed. It's not like she had anywhere else to go. Outside, the wind never stopped moving. Inside, nothing ever changed. In time, they'd have children together, though only one would live to adulthood. Her name was Victoria. The villagers called her the Lark of Kaifeck. She sang hymns in the church choir, a voice so lovely it echoed down the pews like something divine. But a lark is still a bird, and Victoria sang from a cage. She married a local man, Carl Gabriel, in April of 1914. Whispers followed that she might have been expecting when they wed. Her daughter, little Cecilia, was born that January. The farm was in Victoria's name, signed over for her marriage, but it was hers in name only. Carl moved in. Andreas never left. Even marriage wasn't an escape. From the start, things were troubled. Andreas, ever the master of the house, refused to loosen his grip on the farm or the people in it. Carl often complained that there was barely anything to eat, that the old man controlled everything. Jakob Cecil would later claim Carl left Hinterkaifeck just a few weeks after the wedding, returning to his parents' home, unhappy and disillusioned. Some say he saw something in that house, something no man could live with. There were whispers of divorce, but before anything could change, the war came, and Carl volunteered. He was declared dead in December 1914, killed during a reconnaissance mission near Neuville, France, before his daughter could even say his name. When news of his death reached the Gruber home, old Cecilia reportedly said, "Now the divorce is already a done deal." Some say she even donated a keg of beer in celebration. Cecilia Gabriel was born just weeks after Carl's death, a ribbon-haired girl with wide, watchful eyes. She lived her whole short life under the same roof her father had fled. Cecilia learned to walk. Her mother forgot how to run. She was 7 when she died, and she knew something was wrong. She would say someone was moving above her room, soft footsteps pacing the ceiling. No one believed her, not until it was too late. Her little brother, only 2, was asleep nearby. Joseph, too young to truly understand fear. His very birth was a scandal. Victoria said one thing, the village said another. Some believed he was Lorenz Schlittenbauer's child. Others suspected something far worse. But if there was a sin, it didn't belong to Joseph. Fairy tales don't teach you what to do when the monster sleeps in your attic.
I'm a good man, can't you tell? But even saints can come from hell. Oh, ring the bells and light the fire. The suitor's back, but he's a liar. He kissed her hand,
Every fairy tale has a suitor. Sometimes he slays the dragon. Sometimes he doesn't even see the dragon. And sometimes he is the dragon. That's where Lorenz Schlittenbauer enters our story. Born in 1874 in Gruber, he wasn't a stranger from the woods. He was something familiar, a man whose footsteps had always been part of the path to the house. His farm sat just across the field, close enough to see Hinterkaifeck from the window, if you leaned far enough. 13 years older than Victoria, a widower with 4 children, a man others listened to. The village leader. After his wife died in 1918, Lorenz needed someone to care for his home. But Victoria had come to him before that, when his wife was still ill. In those days, grief didn't last long, not when the fields needed tending and the children needed feeding. He told her no, he was married, and after the funeral she asked again, this time in the hayloft. Not shy, not hesitant, not like a maiden in a fairy tale. She pulled him into the straw. What passed between them wasn't love, but it wore a lover's mask. It happened again and again, in barns, carriage houses, between slaughtered geese and grief. When Victoria told Lorenz she was pregnant, she named him the father. But he was fully aware of what else lived in that house. "But your father is still with you," he said. "That's the better thing," she told him. "Then I can say, 'Father, you're here too.' Otherwise, he'll kill me." She was just 16 when it began. She'd once told Lorenz's wife, "He always wanted me," she whispered. "I don't have the strength to fight him off anymore." Fear had a rhythm in that house. It didn't rattle the windows. It settled in the floors, quiet, familiar, like prayer or hunger. At some point, someone spoke. No one knows who, but the village had known for years. In 1915, both Victoria and Andreas were convicted of incest. Andreas was sentenced to 1 year in prison, Victoria 1 month. Their sentences were served, but nothing changed. The conviction didn't cleanse the stain, it only taught Andreas to be more careful. Lorenz needed a wife, so he acknowledged paternity and asked Victoria to marry him. Even Andreas at first seemed to approve, but everything in that house had a price, and nothing stayed clean for long. The proposal didn't last. Two things are known. Andreas was overheard telling his daughter that she didn't need to marry, that as long as he lived, he was there for this. Everyone understood what this meant. Lorenz later recalled, "I genuinely assumed I could marry her. I went to old Gruber's house and suggested it. He agreed, so did she. I told him I had one condition, that he stop having sexual relations with his daughter, that he would repent, that I would guide her onto the right path, that I was a good Christian, that I couldn't live with something like that." Gruber replied, "We'll see." Later, when Lorenz insisted Victoria be left alone, Andreas raised the scythe. Lorenz ran. Then he withdrew his claim of paternity, and in 1919 he reported Andreas and Victoria for incest again. Andreas was arrested. Not long after, records say Victoria begged Lorenz to retract the statement. She pleaded for her father's release. He agreed. Shortly afterward, Lorenz formally acknowledged Josef as his son. It was a public act, with legal and financial consequences. Even then, he admitted, he wasn't sure, not really. The truth didn't resolve, it only receded into the walls of Hinterkaifeck.
Oh hush, don't make a sound. The snow is deep, the truth is drowned. The house is still, but someone knows. A breath behind the window blows.
There's a stillness that settled before the rot showed through. Just silence, low and heavy, like something buried starting to wake. That was the winter of 1922. People would later say it began with small things. Footsteps in the attic, doors opening in the night, a maid who fled and whispered, "The farm is haunted." The house didn't quiet. Not after she left. For Andreas Gruber, Thursday morning, March 30th, began with footprints. Deep ones, carved into the snow, leading from the edge of the woods straight to the engine room, and none leading back. The lock was broken, the door forced. Marks scratched into the feed room as if someone had tried to pry it open. He told Lorenz, even warned a neighbor to head home early. Something felt off. That same day, Andreas and Victoria went to town, and they started talking. Victoria told the shopkeepers she'd heard movement above her, footsteps in the attic, slow and familiar. Andreas told men at the ironmonger's the same. Said he'd gone into the attic with a lantern and found nothing. He wasn't afraid. "My rifle is ready," he said. The next morning, March 31st, one day before the murders, Josef Meyer, the postman, made his usual stop. Gruber and Victoria were outside, standing near the edge of the barn, staring down at the snow. They waved him over, showed him the tracks, told him about the break-in. Then they asked, had he delivered the Munich newspaper? He said no. No one nearby subscribed to that paper, and that was the unsettling part. Hinterkaifeck was isolated. It was visited only by those who meant to be there. And in 1922, a newspaper wasn't discarded. You read it, reread it, but there it was. The newspaper didn't belong. Neither did the footprints. The signs kept coming, some small, some terrifying. One came from a girl named Sophie, a former classmate of little Cecilia Gabriel. She described the last time she saw her friend alive. It was Thursday, March 30th, Cecilia arrived at school exhausted. She kept falling asleep at her desk. The teacher finally asked what was wrong. And softly, like it was nothing at all, she said, "Last night my grandfather beat my mother and she ran away. We went looking for her with the lantern and the dog. We thought she'd gone into the river. We couldn't find her. We thought she was dead. But just after dawn, we found her sitting on a stick in the woods." The next day, Cecilia didn't come to school. The teacher asked the class to pray for her health. But not every warning came with footsteps. Some signs were quieter. At Hinterkaifeck, dread didn't always knock. Sometimes it knelt and prayed. Not long before the murders, something unusual turned up at the parish church in Weidhofen. A bag, quietly left in the confessional. Inside, 700 marks. Father Haas knew his congregation, who had money, who didn't. Only one household could have spared that kind of sum. Hinterkaifeck. The father told Cecilia, "Thank your mother." And Victoria's only reply was, "Yes, the money was mine. It was for the mission." That was all she said. But others said more. Some believed it was hush money, meant to quiet someone. They said the confessional was the safest place she could think of. A holy veil draped over an unholy secret. Others wondered if the priest himself was the middleman. And then came a colder theory, that she wasn't the one being silenced, but the one demanding silence. Maybe it was child support from someone important, someone with a name, a future, a wife. Had they decided it was cheaper to end things than to keep paying? Others believed it was a stash, a secret fund, an escape plan from her father, hidden in a place no one would dare to steal from. By the end of March, something else had crept closer to Hinterkaifeck. They say the first thing Andreas noticed that morning wasn't the footprints. It was the cow, untied, standing loose in the barn. Just a cow unmoored. It was Friday, March 31st, the day before the murders, and for days things had been going wrong. Noises overhead, tools misplaced, the creeping sense that someone was watching. Maybe it slipped free on its own, they said. It happens. But even then, some wondered, was it a lure? A way to draw Andreas outside, to get him alone in the barn? It wouldn't have been the first time that trick was used. And then there was the missing key. The only key. He asked if anyone had seen it. It had simply vanished. He didn't know when or how. Some say Victoria mentioned it too, to shopkeepers in town. No one had seen it. It was just gone. And whoever had it now wouldn't need to break in at all.
Through the maze with charm and Sunday dressing, fed the cows lit flame and softly said her name. He walked like he belonged. The notes they sounded wrong. A grin beneath the snow where stars.
No one noticed this stillness all at once. On Saturday afternoon, two brothers made their way down the muddy path to Hinterkaifeck. Traveling coffee merchants, they arrived between noon and 2, that hour when kitchens are warm and someone always answers the door. They knocked, waited, shifted from foot to foot. Silence. They circled the house. The dog was there, but the people were not. They didn't stay long. Something about the house didn't seem right. That night, someone else passed by. April 1st, around 11:30, Michael Plockel was walking home when he passed Hinterkaifeck, and something stopped him. smoke, rising from the chimney of the outdoor oven. At that hour, it was strange. But stranger still was the smell. Thick, acrid, heavy. It didn't smell like wood or bread. It smelled like cloth, hair, oil. Something burned that shouldn't be. Then, a figure stepped out from the shadows, holding a lantern. He didn't speak, just raised the light and shone it straight into Michael's face, blinding him. No greeting, no explanation. Then, a slow turn and a walk back into the dark. Sunday came. After church, a boy walked the familiar road to the farm. He'd come to buy lard, a simple errand he'd done before. He knocked, waited, then turned back, telling himself what everyone does. They must be out or resting. Next, the choir noticed. Victoria was the lead singer. She never missed a service. 2 friends came to check on her. They knocked on the kitchen door, expecting her smile, but the house said nothing. The choir sang without her, but something else had begun to sing too. The silence. By Monday, the pattern was clear. Joseph Meyer, the postman, knew the house too well. The kitchen door was ajar. The window was empty. The pram usually sat there. No one came to greet him, not even the dog. The silence had become a shape, and it was spreading. Now, people weren't just wondering, they were talking, noticing the silence together. Tuesday morning, the mechanic arrived. Albert Hoffner set out early, pedaling through the cold spring air from Pfaffenhofen. His task was simple: repair the engine. He arrived around 9 a.m., expecting to find someone waiting. The gate was locked, the front door locked. At first, it felt explainable. Farmers worked the fields. Sometimes they missed visitors. He waited. Nearly an hour passed. Nothing changed. Eventually, he decided to begin. The engine shed was locked with a simple padlock. He bent the hook open and let himself in. For the next several hours, the air filled with the sound of tools striking metal. Hoffner whistling, singing, the engine rattling. He made noise on purpose. Surely someone would hear the racket and come by. But no one came. At one point, a nut slipped from his fingers and dropped into the cooling pit. He climbed down after it. The reservoir was dry. As he stood a meter below ground, he heard it. Footsteps, fast, close. A coat catching the wind. Movement just outside. He scrambled up, looked around. Whoever it was gone. The stillness had returned. He finished the repair around 2:30 p.m. The barn door was now wide open. He glanced inside from a distance near the front door. The family dog had been tied up. It barked violently. Hoffner didn't linger. After more than 5 hours on the property, he left Hinterkaifeck without seeing a single soul. By Tuesday afternoon, news started reaching Lorenz Schlittenbauer in pieces. By then, it was no longer a missed visit or two. Too many had left the farm without answers. Lorenz sent his sons Johann and Josef to the farm. The message was simple. Tell them the engine is repaired. They arrived sometime between 3 and 3:30. At the stable, they pushed on the door, but it held fast. They called into the trees for the family. No answer. The boys went home, told their father what they found. Lorenz started counting the days in his head. Cecilia hadn't shown up for school. The postman, the mechanic, the peddlers, the boy who came for lard. Any one of those visits could have been explainable, but not all of them. He went to Jakob Cecil and said, "Something's wrong at Gabriel's. Either they've hanged themselves or something worse." It was a terrible thing to say, and even worse to believe. But What else could explain this kind of silence? No one had seen the family in days. They would go to the farm because now the silence wasn't just strange, it was a threat. By the time they reached the farm, the quiet had turned to dread. Lorenz walked ahead, the other men followed. No one tried the front. Instead, Lorenz led them straight towards the barn. The gate to the engine house was unlocked. Inside, the light fell away quickly. The threshing floor was still. At the feed room door, a calf leaned from its stall. Lorenz stepped forward. Michael, just behind, felt something solid beneath his boot. Heavy. "There's something here," he said. Lorenz turned back, bent down, gripped a foot sticking out of the hay, and pulled. Andreas Gruber. A broken stable door had been dragged over the bodies. Beneath it, Andreas Gruber, Cecilia Gruber, Victoria Gabriel, and little Cecilia Gabriel. They were piled together in the feed room, limbs tangled, bodies overlapping, too tightly packed to tell where one ended and the other began. Their faces were soaked in blood. It had run into their clothes, darkening the straw beneath them. Lorenz began dragging the bodies out. Jakob and Michael told him to stop. He didn't. He pulled Andreas onto the threshing floor, moved the women, lifted the child. He clung to their skin. Then Lorenz said, "Where will my little boy be then?" Jakob and Michael started backing away from the barn. Lorenz kept going. He moved through the stable passage into the house. The men heard the sound of a key turning. Lorenz had unlocked the front door. They followed. In a bedroom, a pram sat beneath an old skirt. When they pulled back the cloth, Joseph Gabriel's skull had been split open. The canopy was torn. Brain matter clung to the fabric. In the kitchen, everything looked normal. A bowl of bread soup sat cold on the stove, potato peels nearby, edges drying mid-preparation. The door to the small bedroom stood ajar. Inside, Jakob noticed shoes sticking out beneath the bedding. Lorenz entered, pulled back the covers. Maria Baumgartner, the maid. Her face was bloodied. By the window sat a rucksack she had borrowed, packed for her first day on the farm. She hadn't made it through a single one. Lorenz said he didn't recognize her. Jakob and Michael had seen enough. Again, they told Lorenz to stop touching things, stop moving the bodies. The men left Lorenz to report what they'd found. But he lingered, tending to the animals, as if the blood and the straw weren't still warm. By the time Jakob and Michael left that night, the house no longer felt like a crime scene. It felt tampered with, and by the time the authorities arrived, it wasn't discovery anymore, it was aftermath.
Goes the timber, tiptoes the beams.
The spider in the rafters wears a widow's lace. He dances on the ceiling with a button.
On the evening of April 4th, local gendarmes arrived first. A judicial commission followed, led by Senior Judge Wiesner. The silence had already been broken. The barn door opened, the bodies uncovered, moved. Even in 1922, a crime scene was meant to be preserved. By the time the Munich criminal police arrived the next morning, nothing was untouched. The farm seemed split in two. The barn held violence. What happened there had been done with intention and with force. 4 people drawn into the dark and struck down, one by one. No hesitation, no mercy. Inside the house, it was different. No chaos, No overturned furniture, no broken lamps. The kitchen looked paused, not abandoned, as if someone had stepped away mid-thought. The drawers hung open, the cabinets slightly ajar, like someone meant to return but never did. But the search had been careful, almost deliberate. Valuables remained untouched. There were coins in containers, paper money in bedsheets and cupboards, mortgage bonds, deposit slips, jewelry, watches, all still there. It wasn't someone taking what they could. It was someone who stopped once they found what they came for. If it was robbery, it was a strange one. The deeper investigators looked, the less it resembled anything they understood. The killer had taken their time, and time, it seemed, had helped them. Before anything else could be understood, there was one final indignity: the autopsies. They weren't done at a hospital, or a morgue, or even indoors. They were carried out in the courtyard of Hinterkaifeck, in the open air, with neighbors and animals nearby, on the same door that had once covered the bodies in the barn. It had been laid across sawhorses. The bodies, one by one, were placed on top. Dr. Johanna Mueller performed the examinations. He was precise, efficient. The setting was anything but sterile. Blood still soaked into straw. Flies circled the wounds, and children may have peeked from behind barn walls. Andreas Gruber was found in his nightclothes, caught unarmed, unready. Blunt trauma crushed his cheekbone, cracked his skull, and tore flesh from bone. A pickaxe was suspected, or something like it. But the weapon wasn't found. Not yet. Cecilia Gruber had been struck again and again, her skull fractured, her right eye and jaw destroyed. One triangular wound cut deep into her head. She never had time to run. Victoria Gabriel had 9 star-shaped wounds to the head, a sharp blow to the right side of her face. But what set her apart was the imprint of a rope wrapped around her neck, pressed so deep, every strand seemed burned into the skin. Someone had taken their time. She had no shoes and no coat, as if she just stepped out for a moment. Maria Baumgartner was attacked while lying down. A 4-centimeter hole punched through the back of her skull. Blood streaked her face. She likely never saw the killer coming. Joseph was just 2. He lay in his pram, tucked beneath a cloth, his skull split open. The blow so violent it tore through the canopy overhead. If there was any mercy that day, it was that he died instantly. Little Cecilia Gabriel, however, lived longer. Her skull, like the others, had been shattered, her jaw broken. A round wound marked her face, just beneath the nose. A wide gash tore through her neck. Her own fingerprints were found on her throat, grasping, desperate, trying to survive. She lived 2 to 3 hours after the attack, the only victim to remain conscious. When they unfolded her fists, they found what she couldn't let go of: herself. Clumps of her own hair torn out in agony. Each of the 4 found in the barn had been struck hardest on the right side, as if someone had been waiting, hidden in the shadows, striking from the same place again and again as the others came looking. It was like one heard a sound and followed, until the barn was full of bodies. Once the autopsies were completed, the pallbearers moved without speaking, across the yard one by one. Andreas, Victoria, then Cecilia, and then, as they lifted the child, a sound overhead. Soft, sudden, a thud. A rope dropped right from the rafters. It fell fast and straight, landing hard on the threshing floor. The men froze. One shouted, the stretcher jolted and slipped. Little Cecilia fell to the ground with a sickening thud. Everyone stood still, confused, shocked. There had been no rope there before. Not when the bodies were found, not when the barn was searched, not during the autopsies. But now, a length of hay rope, thick as a thumb, hung from the beam above. At the top, a knot, and just beyond it, handprints pressed into the dusty wood. The knot was new, the rope long enough to climb or to drop. Dust motes hung in the air like whoever had been there had only just fled. Upstairs, they would find signs of something almost more chilling than the murder. A bed shaped from straw, food half-eaten and left to rot. And in the corner, human waste. The imprint of someone who had made himself at home, and near the edge of the roof, a patch of tiles pulled back. Just enough for someone to keep watch. Someone had been living in the attic for days, maybe longer. He had memorized the rhythm of their days, listened as they whispered behind closed doors. The family could sense it. They heard the footsteps, felt watched. But they never found him, because he had learned the house better than they had ever imagined. He had waited in the silence until the moment was right. And then he didn't leave. Not after the murders. Not after the bodies were found. Not even when police filled the yard. He stayed in the attic, inches above them, close enough to hear their breath, high enough in the rafters, still, patient, unseen, like a spider in the beams.
6 went walking, 5 came back. 5 went walking, 4 came back. 4 went walking, 3 came back. 3 went walking, 2 came back. 2 went walking, 1 came back. 1 went walking, none came back. Then silence.
Spiders don't spin webs without reason. Whoever did this didn't simply kill. They remained. They moved through that house as if it were already theirs. Who hated them enough to stay that close for that long? For more than a century, the forest around Hinterkaifeck has been thick with names. Some were dragged into the light, arrested, questioned, released, proof dissolving like mist at sunrise. I won't walk you through every shadow, only the ones that linger. I'm not offering certainty, only the stories that grew in the dark. Every fairy tale has a dark forest, and sometimes, hidden in it, are wolves who walk in pairs. Before there was blood, there was another maid. Long before the axe, she heard the knocking. What she said afterward made investigators look again, not at one man, but 2. Because Hinterkaifeck did not look like frenzy. The barn was strangely orderly, except where the blood soaked the hay. Andreas Gruber was built like a stump, mean as a saw blade. 63, but hard and strong from daily labor. And yet, he'd gone down without a fight. So, the theory emerged. 2 killers. And who could do such a thing side by side and never turn on each other? Brothers. The suspect lists were full of them. In those days, even having a brother was enough to make you dangerous. But 2 pairs were tied to one thread. A maid's recollection, shifting in detail, unwavering in certainty. 2 statements, 1922 and 1952, 30 years apart. The fear was the same, only the names changed. Her tale starts like this. She was pregnant when she arrived, alone, and he came knocking. Anton Bichler. He proposed not long after she arrived. The Grubers warned her. He's a thief, they said. But he kept coming around, sometimes to help with the harvest, and sometimes to slip food from the pantry. She almost let him in. Loneliness is a quiet rot. He knew the property well. Rieger said he knocked on her window at night. "Hey," he said, again and again. She stayed in bed, her mattress barely a meter from the glass. Finally, she asked what he wanted. He told her to open the window. Even now she couldn't say why she didn't, only that she almost did. When she refused, he asked again. Then, things turned strange. He asked where the young woman of the house slept. Rieger told him she didn't know. But he kept pressing. "She's in the marital bed, isn't she? And her father sleeping beside her." Then came the details, too specific to be guessed. He described the oven, how the family hid their money in a roasting tube by day, then tucked it beneath the bed at night. The man spoke as though he'd stood inside that house before. She heard the footsteps in the leaves. Asked him, "Who's with you?" "No one," he said. But after he left, she looked out the kitchen window. 2 figures, walking toward the barn. They stopped in the middle of the yard. One of them looked up at the gable, the other straight at her window. For days she found burnt matchsticks beneath the sill, and at night, footsteps pressed into the garden beds. Then there was the dog. It barked at everyone, even bit the child once. But not him, never him. Not even when he came skulking in the dark, breathing at the glass. Then something else began. Her chamber door started opening on its own, at midnight. Always midnight. She told herself it was a draft, but it came every night. And each time she rose to look, no one was there. Anton admitted to visiting Rieger at her window at night. He called it romantic. Fenced down, a Bavarian courtship ritual. Young men would climb to a woman's window to woo her in secret. It certainly didn't get any better after she got wind of the rumors from strangers after she turned him down. Whispers that Anton had said he planned to let her through. Durchschlossen. Around here it meant to let her pass, as in from this world to the next. She tried to complain to the family, but Mrs. Gabriel only rolled her eyes and scoffed. "If only someone would eat you alive because you're so afraid." "Maybe you'll die without confession or communion," Andreas joked. Rieger answered, "Maybe you will too." I like to think she stared him dead in the eye as she said it. She left soon after, and when they asked her again 30 years later, it was the same story, except now it wasn't the Bichler brothers. It was the Thaler brothers. Later, she told the lover, if I'd still been down there, they'd have killed me too. The Thalers were arrested and held for weeks, but there was no proof, just her word and, once again, the name of 2 brothers. Fairy tales have rules. The cursed are marked. The stranger stays in the woods, unless he doesn't. And then he slips past the tree line, quiet, smiling, and no one sees him coming.
Butcher, baker, widow maker, left his name on every acre. Pinky gone and mind unmade, wandered off and slipped the blade.
Iron one, where did you go? Through the woods and into snow. Bit his hand and left with teeth, sank like stone beneath the heat.
Some suspects leave blood. Others leave a silence that never quite stops humming. And then there's the man they called the Iron One. A drifter by choice, a ghost by accident, Joseph Bartle was born in Geisenfeld, close enough to walk if you knew the woods. He was a baker by trade, but a butcher's son, and some said it showed. Hands like cleavers, and a grip that felt wrong. They said he lost the finger in a machine, or in a fight, or that it was taken as a payment for something no one would name. The Iron One was one print short, the pinky, gone. Left hand missing the smallest digit, they would say. In 1919, a farmer was murdered just outside Geinsfeld, and Bartle's name was on that warrant. They never had to break him. His mind did the work for them. Whether it snapped inside the holding cell or long before, no one could say. They called it prison psychosis. He muttered, he laughed. He tried to bite through the meat of his own hand. He was sentenced to prison, but they sent him somewhere colder, the Günzburg Asylum, a place people entered but didn't leave. On July 4th, 1921, he vanished. Past the gates and the guards, no one knows how. He just wasn't there anymore. And then, just months later, he was close enough to walk. The police reached for logic and came back with folklore. They mailed the skulls to a clairvoyant in Munich. They decapitated the bodies, boxed the skulls, and shipped them straight to Munich. She sat blindfolded as the bones were laid before her, said nothing until they handed her the photographs. She passed them one by one, then stopped. "This one," she said. "Joseph Bartle." For reasons no one could quite explain, the police believed her. A wanted poster even went out in 1926. He was traveling alone, using the name Edenhammer, never staying long, sleeping in the woods. Then came the rumors that he roamed the forests, half-starved, half-mad, feeding off roots and rage. All we really know is he was gone. Once he was just a man, a baker, 10 fingers and a name. But that's not how people remember him. They remember the way he glitched out of existence. All that's left is a name, a vanished man. Sometimes the scariest thing is how easy someone can disappear.
Devil 1 and Devil 2, which of them is telling true? Devil 3 with folded hands, saints are born in wicked lands. Child.
Be careful what you say.
But Father, I came here to pray.
Some spells are cast with silence, and they don't break until someone speaks. In a family of 16, the family tree stretches wide. Some branches grow twisted in the dark, thick with rot no one wanted to cut. From the darkest fork of that tree, 2 names kept turning up, Adolf and Anton. Adolf Gump had served with the Freikorps Oberland, a paramilitary band of men who came home from war with blood still on their boots. Some say groups like theirs began to roam the countryside, like bandits, but disciplined, precise. The tactic of these groups was simple. A cow goes loose to lure a farmer, farmer disappears, and in the morning, nothing left but torn flesh and blood. New Year's Eve, 1951, the radio station from Munich crackles in the background. A couple sits at their kitchen table for a friendly game of checkers. The announcer's voice cuts through the static. The case is solved. The couple breathes a sigh of relief. Thank God, Anton says. They lean in, listening. A name is given. A suspect. Anton leans forward. The checkers go still. I'm the one they're talking about, he said. And then nothing but the crackle of the radio. He's arrested, held, interrogated for over a year. They mocked him in the papers, called him the criminal who cowered. I thought of turning on the gas, Anton once said, but then they'd say, aha, there you have it, so it was him. He didn't die that night, but something in him did. The accusation had come from a priest. In 1941, Father Haber, at the bedside of a dying woman. Her name was Crescence Meyer, born Crescence Gump, their sister. She didn't ask for forgiveness, but fire and brimstone. When the priest knelt beside her, she gave him names. Adolf and Anton. She said they planned it, said one of them described it to her, how they lured the family, like something they'd done before. Adolf and Crescence hadn't spoken in decades, since well before Hinterkaifeck ever happened. Father Haber sat at her bedside. She asked him to report it. Another priest, Father Rizzi, had heard it too. When the Hinterkaifeck case returned to the headlines, the priest spoke, and then the investigation turned toward the Gumps. The public prosecutor said, since Anton Gump Sr. was declared incompetent due to alcoholism, the guilt of the brothers would be biologically based. Their father drank, so the sons were killers. The judge told Anton, just confess. The statute of limitations has expired. But Anton shook his head. Something like this doesn't expire. All of his friends and coworkers spoke in his favor. He was always cheerful, they said. I'd vouch for him with my life. While Anton's reputation was impeccable, the same could not be said for his sister. According to multiple witnesses, she beat her father on his deathbed, snatched flowers from his hands, tried to sell his corpse to the anatomy department for 100 marks. Their father's final words about her weren't much softer. She doesn't have one devil in her, he said. She has 100. Her coworkers said she was dirty, she stole, she lied. We fired her quickly. But truth doesn't always bloom in blood-soaked soil. Sometimes it gets choked by it. The raids, the tactics, the blood on their boots, it all sounded so convincing, so cinematic, like something out of a war film, only they weren't soldiers, they were basket makers, walking from village to village peddling their wares. Willow, not rifles, but nobody ever made a campfire tale about that.
Scratch of boots on the barn loft stair, paper wheels in the attic air.
They didn't cry, they didn't run, they knew the work was nearly done.
They took the cows, they fair beasts, they stole the farm like sing feasts, and all was calm for those who dared to.
Not all monsters live in the woods. Some build nests in rafters and wait. For years, the Gabriel family watched Hinterkaifeck from a distance. Shortly after Carl fled the farm, someone reported the incest inside the Gruber household. The informant was never recorded. In this theory, it was the Gabriels. By 1918, Victoria tried to remarry. Another husband meant another claim, another shift in inheritance. Then came the loans. thousands of marks borrowed against the land. To the Gabriels, it may have looked like mismanagement or theft. Property they once expected slipping further away, and then the murders. What happened at Hinterkaifeck did not resemble robbery. Cash remained, valuables untouched. It looked less like looting and more like searching. Afterward, the Gabriels made a legal move. Their claim hinged on one detail, that little Cecilia died last. If she inherited from her mother and then died, the estate could pass sideways, right to them. The court rejected the argument. Under German law, deaths in a common catastrophe are presumed simultaneous, but the attempt matters because it means the order of death mattered to someone. And then there was Joseph, too young to speak, too young to resist, too young to be a witness. So why kill him? Unless a surviving child complicated everything. A living heir is a legal obstacle, and obstacles are inconvenient. And then we have the Hexenholz, the Witch's Wood. It bordered Hinterkaifeck, and some say that in the days before the murders, the Gabriel brothers stood in those trees watching. Some even say it was Carl Gabriel that was watching, but there were enough witnesses to his death and burial, and ghosts don't feed cattle. It is said that they took turns as lookouts, broke into the engine shed, that it was Jakob just returned home from the war who dropped the Munich newspaper, that it was their footsteps in the attic, their hands that took the keys. Much of this theory rests on one account, a maid. Her name was Maria Missel. She worked for the Gabriels in 1921. She said there was a feud, bitter, open. Victoria at odds with her in-laws. One day, Mrs. Gabriel told Maria a scandalous story. Victoria had been ill since 17. A doctor recommended intercourse. No suitable man could be found. So, Andreas Gruber took her virginity, with his wife present, and afterward, Victoria became pregnant. In this version of events, the incest isn't just village gossip. It's proof that little Cecilia could never have belonged to Carl. One evening, Joseph Gabriel left around 6 p.m., saying he needed to check the forest plot just 5 minutes away. He returned more than 2 hours later. Dinner followed. All were present, but the table was quiet. Then Maria was sent outside to fetch firewood. Twice. She obeyed, but she knew she was being distracted. On her second trip outside, Mrs. Gabriel ran out to meet her. "Maria," she said, "the Hinterkaifeck family has been murdered. They're all dead. Go inside, lock the door. We're afraid." Maria obeyed. Only then did the house light up. The 3 sons abruptly said goodnight and vanished into their room. Maria asked the obvious question, "Who told you about the murders?" "Anton," said Mrs. Gabriel. But Anton hadn't left the house. No one cried or ran to the farm. 6 people apparently butchered, but I guess the Gabriels needed their beauty sleep. The next morning, Joseph left at dawn to go feed the cattle at Hinterkaifeck. "They haven't been fed in days," Mrs. Gabriel said. Maria was unsure how she knew that. He returned, changed clothes, then went back. That same day, the Gabriels took 5 cattle from the farm. That evening, Joseph and Anton returned to Hinterkaifeck again, and later, Jakob, Mrs. Gabriel, and Maria followed. Beds were moved, so were dishes. Curious behavior, really. almost like they were staging the house, as if someone might come asking questions and they wanted the answers already set. On the third night, before leaving, Mrs. Gabriel turned to Maria. "Maria, please, don't say anything." Maria asked, "About what?" Mrs. Gabriel looked at her with raised brow. "Thaler stole a plow." Not exactly the talk of a grieving neighbor, but perhaps it's the kind of detail you'd feed someone if you needed her to repeat it later, in case someone came around asking questions. Then there was one last thing Maria said. She was washing shirts. One had a stain, dark, sticky, blood. Jakob had a nosebleed, Mrs. Gabriel told her. But Maria had seen his nosebleeds before. They didn't look like that. Maria never accused, she only described. The farm was divided, sold in shares scattered, and in time the Gabriels bought much of it back. Seems like their waiting paid off. It's a chilling thought, the Gabriels returning to the farm like spiders to the rafters.
Not mine.
Snow falls quiet, snow falls clean. No one hears what lies between.
One by one the candles bend.
Well, dear viewer, you've seen him already, watching the farm. Lorenz Schlittenbauer. A cliche, perhaps, the jilted suitor. I'm not here to choose between heartbreak, humiliation, or spite, only to trace the shape of a life. After his first wife's death, he was left with children and aging in-laws. When Victoria stepped in to help, familiar, capable, he said yes. He was no fool. He knew the timing, the whispers, the father who still slept behind her door. The child might not be his, but a young wife, a prosperous farm, a future. Some calculations are made quietly. So he agreed to claim the boy. Then the arrangement faltered. Andreas couldn't let Victoria go. So, September 10th, 1919, Lorenz reported the incest. Victoria came to him in tears, begging him to retract it, promising marriage again, offering to cover the court cost for Lorenz to claim baby Josef. He said yes again, and this time he did more than forgive. He dropped the charges and legally acknowledged Josef as his son. In 1922 Germany, that decision could not be undone, not for any reason, and support payments were calculated from the mother's income. The Gruber farm was very valuable. What was promised to cost him nothing could now cost him everything. And then Victoria changed her mind about the marriage again. Lorenz remarried, but the claim remained. A son he could not disown, a promise he could not retract, and a village that never forgot. Now let me spin if you don't mind. The threads are there, fine as gossamer. There's a story told about Lorenz. A tavern, pints on the table. The innkeeper jokes, "If only we had money of the Hinterkaifeckers." Lorenz doesn't laugh. "They didn't have as much as people think," he says. An interesting thing to know, because money was moving. 5,000 marks borrowed for a threshing machine that never arrived. 700 marks left in a church confessional. Why borrow thousands only to give hundreds away? Maybe silence has a price. After the child, after the charges, after the lie, perhaps Lawrence named his for retracting his statement. And, for a time, Victoria may have paid it. But then, something changed. In October 1919, Lawrence admitted under oath that he had lied when retracting his accusations. The Grubers were acquitted because after admitting to that lie, his credibility was broken. If he threatened scandal again, who would believe him? Word spread that Victoria intended to sue for alimony. A public trial. Reputations dragged into daylight. Lawrence now had a new wife, a new house, more mouths to feed. Scandal is expensive. So are children. There are no receipts, no invoices, just gaps, a machine that never arrived, and money that went somewhere. On February 5th, 1922, Anna Schlittenbauer gave birth to a daughter. On Sunday, March 26th, the child died. The next day, life went on. But something inside their house changed. Neighbors noticed it the week of the murders. Lights on late at night, voices raised, angry, heated. Soon after, people noticed that Lawrence was gone. A lot. His wife Anna mentioned it once. Said he'd been sleeping in the hayloft. To catch hay thieves, she said. Others remembered it too. His children, neighbors. If someone called on him, they'd shrug. Father's in the hayloft. He's keeping watch. In all of the pages of statements, no one, not his wife, not his children, not even himself, could say exactly where Lawrence Schlittenbauer was on the night of March 31st. If that absence is not a coincidence, the manner of the deaths begins to speak. Victoria was the only one strangled. That kind of death is intimate and close, and it's significantly more common in intimate partner violence. There is a misconception that family massacres like this one are always planned ahead, but this is not true. They often start as a confrontation with one person that crosses a line. If Victoria went out to the barn, possibly expecting someone, and she didn't return, her mother, who was cooking at the stove, would eventually get curious. Imagine her going out to the barn after her daughter. Now the killer has a real problem, because one body might be a secret, but two? That's a complication. Now his hands let go of the rope, and his eyes dart, frantic, searching for a far more efficient weapon. By the time Andreas Gruber realizes something's wrong, the shape of the night has already changed. Anyone who walked into that barn could not be allowed to walk back out. Most multi-victim killings don't begin with the plan to erase the entire household. They begin with a grievance. On Tuesday, April 4th, 1922, before a single body was seen, Lawrence was certain of death. He jumped immediately to, "They've all been murdered." When he arrived at Hinterkaifeck, he led them straight across the yard to the barn, not to the house where most would begin, as if drawn by memory, not curiosity. And then there's the missing key. The men distinctly heard the soft click of the front door unlocking, and through it all, Lawrence spoke of the family, not with horror or confusion, but with certainty. God had avenged the incest. That's why it was so easy. The killer just had to strike. He couldn't possibly fail. In Lawrence's mind, this was retribution. And then he offered details no one had asked for, such as the killer meant to bury them, but the ground was frozen. In the weeks after the murders, Grief faded, silence settled, but Lorenz Schlittenbauer kept talking. In taverns, in inns. Someone voiced what many believed. It must have taken more than one. Lorenz disagreed. Well, of course, that was easy. I waited until they came one after the other and knocked them down. When someone asked how a man could enter and leave without leaving extra footprints in the snow, Lorenz answered, I went in straight ahead and out the other side. The men stared at him, because for a moment, he hadn't been theorizing. He'd been remembering. One of the men later recalled, the innkeeper and I were quite astonished at that moment, because he was talking about himself. So Lenz, was it you? They asked. Lorenz turned pale. Again and again he told the same story, that it was easy, that they were led, that it could not fail, that God had cleared the path. Now, why don't we let him speak for himself? His witness statements. Lorenz didn't start with where he was or what he saw. He started with who he wanted us to think he was. Not testimony, a character reference written by the subject himself. Again and again, before facts, Lorenz offers his virtue. It spans every subject. Finances. I was quite well off. I always saved. Morality. I preferred to take the punishment upon myself. Religion. I was a good Christian. Sex. I didn't say no because I thought I needed a wife in my household again. This is not cherry picking. It's a pattern. The self-martyrdom is not occasional. It's structural. Before he tells us what happened, he tells us he's good. And when a man insists on goodness, it is often because he anticipates doubt. But virtue requires contrast, and so, as he builds himself, he dismantles Victoria. He does not describe intimacy, he describes temptation. She was very easy to please. She immediately offered herself. She threw herself onto the hay. Notice the choreography. She advances, she urges, she insists, he endures. It's a careful inversion. When blame must be relocated, desire becomes hers. Sexual shaming is an old trick, as old as sin and twice as quiet. The blame is hers now, and the shame? Well, that too. And it wasn't just Victoria. While he spends a remarkable effort building his own character, he spends just as much time tearing down the Grubers. Before Lorenz ever described what he saw in the barn, before a single word about blood or bodies, he has already judged the household and described the violence as an act of God. This is where grievance slips in, dressed for church. It doesn't say I chose this. It says, they made me do it. He spoke of the Gruber children, neglected, starved, locked in cellars, beaten, crying out. Keep in mind that I could not find a single other witness to corroborate any of these claims. Neither maid nor farmhand who would have lived in that home with the Grubers said any such thing. Now there's one place where the performance falters, where the mask slips, just slightly. Joseph. When asked how he felt about the paternity, Lorenz flared, briefly. Of course I was furious about the paternity issue. My boy reproached me. But then, he caught himself, reversed course. It's not true that I was upset. I've never in my life been upset, never harbored hatred for anyone. The whole community considers me a good man. The first line is unguarded. The second, controlled. It's not the absence of anger, it's the rejection of it. In the statements, Lorenz is constantly going between my boy and the child. This can occur with paternal ambivalence, when love and resentment live in the same house. Joseph wasn't just a child. He was a symbol of shame, of betrayal, of something Lorenz may have longed to claim and just as deeply to reject. This is not a man who doesn't feel. It's a man who doesn't want you to know that he does. I do not believe the killer at Hinterkaifeck was a sadist or a thrill killer. He wasn't a madman grinning in the dark. Grievance doesn't announce itself. That's the problem. It builds, one injury at a time, one betrayal at a time, one slight that no one else noticed, but he did. Until one day, violence doesn't feel like cruelty at all. It feels like balance. That doesn't mean Lorenz Schlittenbauer was such a man, but the voice in his statements, the rehearsed virtue, the moral theater, the quiet degradation of a dead woman, the child he both claimed and denied, the anger that slipped out and was stuffed back in, that voice doesn't sound like grief or shock to me. It sounds like a man with a ledger.
Once upon a snowy night, under beams of crooked white, 6 small candles lost their glow. But where they went, we'll never know.
So, the house stood still, long after the boots stopped treading hay, long after the bodies were carried out. The wind kept its breath. The walls, what was left of them, kept their secrets. But no one stayed. No one wanted to. After just 1 year, the farm was demolished, hauled down, beam by beam, like you might bury a body that wouldn't rot fast enough. Some say it was cursed. Some say it was shame. Either way, they tore it from the earth, as if forgetting would be allowed. But forgetting doesn't work like that, because the story stayed. Not in the attic, not in the walls, but in the silence, in the papers, in the voice of a man who told you what kind of person he was, before he told you what he saw. Once upon a time, there was a house. It had a roof, a path, a door, but no one lived happily ever after. In fact, no one lived there at all. And that's the story, or most of it. You've listened well, better than most. So, what do you think? Was it the brothers, the madman, the one who felt wronged? Or maybe it was the house. Go on, whisper it below. I won't tell a soul.
Nothing lives here.